It is said that Metallica laid the groundwork for the genre of thrash metal. Nonetheless, the betrayal that caused their initial lineup to fall apart almost brought about the demise of both James Hetfield and Dave Mustaine before they both became legendary. Fans were under the impression that they knew the story for 40 years. Mustaine left the band in 1983 because of disagreements on creative direction. In this most recent interview, however, Hetfield finally disclosed the stunning reality that lies behind one of the most acrimonious feuds in the history of metal, and it had nothing to do with music at all. James Alan Hetfield and David Scott Mustaine were not just bandmates in the early stages of Metallica. They were also musical brothers who shared a passion for speed, anger, and pushing the boundaries of metal music to their extreme limits. Both of them were hungry young musicians who were yearning to escape their terrible backgrounds through the raw power of heavy music when they first met in the early 1980s in the Los Angeles metal scene. Hetfield, who was born in Downey, California in 1963, had spent his childhood in a household that adhered to the rigorous principles of Christian Science. His mother's religious beliefs kept her from seeking medical treatment for her disease, which finally resulted in her passing when James was only 16 years old. The powerful rhythm guitar approach and authoritative voice that he possessed would later come to define the sound of Metallica. Music became his shelter from the pain and hatred that he has experienced. Mustaine, who was born in La Mesa, California in 1961, contributed an energy that was distinct from the other partners, yet at the same time intense. During his childhood, he was subjected to the abandonment of his father and the many relocations of his family. His scorching lead guitar work and strong stage presence were manifestations of his restless and occasionally turbulent personality, which he expressed through his performance. Not only did he bring his technical skills to Metallica when he joined the band in 1981, but he also brought numerous songs that would go on to become the band's most iconic tunes. It is impossible to deny the undeniable musical connection that Hetfield and Mustaine established from their pairing. They pushed each other to play faster for numerous hours in confined rehearsal settings, which were crowded with people. In comparison to everyone else in the scene, they are more forceful and aggressive. The scope of their collective vision for what metal could become extended beyond the creation of music. They were establishing a movement that would have an impact on musicians at all stages of their careers. During the early stages of Metallica's existence, the two guitarists shared a relationship that was practically identical to that of brothers. Together, they shared a home, shared a passion for partying, and shared an ambition of dominating the metal world. They lived together. Because they were so close to one another, the events that would eventually take place between them were much more painful. Metallica was gaining momentum by the year 1982, but the fierce personalities that powered their cooperation were also producing considerable friction between them. Mustaine's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, which was driven by excessive drinking and what his bandmates characterized as unexpected mood swings that could turn violent without any prior notice. Mustaine is accused of causing damage to hotel property while under the influence of alcohol during the first big incident, which took place on a tour in the beginning of 1982. According to the band's accounts, he damaged furniture and hurled a television out of a hotel window, which resulted in the band being forced to pay large damages and causing tension with the proprietors of the venue. It was during a tour in the beginning of 1983 that the relationship reached its breaking point. Yet, the culminating event was not what the fans had anticipated. In spite of the fact that the official narrative centered on Mustaine's lack of dependability, Hetfield disclosed in 2023 that the true impetus was a personal betrayal that went far further than having problems with professional colleagues. Recent admissions made by Hetfield indicate that Mustaine had violated a boundary concerning personal connections and trust that had been developing for more than 2 years. According to reports, the altercation that brought an end to Mustaine's tenure with Metallica took place in a hotel room prior to a performance that was supposed to take place. The witnesses reported hearing a loud shout through the walls, which was then followed by the throwing of something heavy. Other members of the band conducted an investigation, during which they discovered that Mustaine's instrument had been broken and Hetfield had refused to speak about what had occurred. On rare occasions, after we had finished a program, Dave would suddenly lose his cool about something that was absolutely unrelated to the show. After some time had passed, drummer Lars Ulrich recalled that Dave Mustaine's reaction to being kicked out of Metallica was both immediate and heartbreaking. Within a few short months of being forced out of the band, he had established Megadeth with the very intention of demonstrating that he was the more talented musician and that Metallica had made a grave error in their decision. This was not simply about forming a new band. Rather, it was about using music as a weapon to wage war against his colleagues from previous bands. The early material released by Megadeth was replete with attacks against Metallica that were only barely concealed, with tracks such as Mechanics functioning as Mustaine's rendition of what would eventually become Metallica's rendition of the Four Horsemen. What was being communicated was quite clear. Anything Metallica was capable of doing, Mustaine was capable of doing better, faster, and more technically skilled. The rivalry that existed between the two bands during the 1980s became one of the most prominent rivalries in the metal music scene. Both bands were signed to major record labels and started releasing albums that pushed the limits of speed and aggression in comparison to previous releases, each one attempting to surpass the other in terms of the level of technical intricacy and the level of commercial success obtained. While this was going on, Hetfield was struggling with the pressure of demonstrating that Metallica had made the correct decision. The cooperation between the band and Kirk Hammett, who took over for Mustaine as lead guitarist, resulted in a new dynamic while ultimately resulting in a more solid dynamic. Nevertheless, Hetfield bore the burden of the unresolved battle with Mustaine, since he was aware that their former bandmate was utilizing his suffering as a source of inspiration for music that was becoming increasingly successful. The personal hatred between the two parties was only exacerbated by the public attention that surrounded the competition. As a result of the persistent questioning of both bands by music journalists regarding the breakup, the bands were forced to relive the conflict in interviews, which served to keep the scars fresh. Mustaine and Hetfield both became proficient at diplomatic responses, but the underlying hurt and anger was clear to anyone who watched them closely. Both of them were skilled at responding diplomatically. Over the course of the 1980s and 1990s, the rivalry was played out on the most prestigious stages around the world. During this time, both Metallica and Megadeth achieved enormous success, but their respective leaders continued to engage in a silent conflict. According to reports from reliable sources within the industry, management teams made concerted efforts to avoid scheduling conflicts and ensured that the musicians were kept apart at important concerts. At the beginning of the 1990s, when both bands were at the height of their commercial success, the competition reached its strongest point. The Black Album, which was released by Metallica in 1991, brought about mainstream success that Megadeth was unable to match. Mustaine's band, on the other hand, managed to preserve the critical respectability that some people believed Metallica had lost. Both musicians were struggling behind the scenes to deal with the personal toll that their unresolved quarrel was taking on them. Hetfield's struggles with alcoholism were well documented, and some who were close to him thought that the guilt he felt about the incident with Mustaine was one of the factors that spurred his drinking. After overcoming his own struggles with substance misuse, Mustaine eventually transformed his life and became a Christian. In 2023, exactly 40 years after Dave Mustaine left Metallica, James Hetfield finally disclosed the full truth of their feud in a detailed interview that shook the metal community. The interview was conducted by James Hetfield. Over the course of 4 decades, his acknowledgement that the disagreement was not primarily about music, but rather about personal betrayal reframed the antagonism that had existed between them. It took some time for the reconciliation to have taken place. The conflict started in the middle of the 2000s, when both men began openly conceding that their dispute had been going on for an excessive amount of time. Mustaine was diagnosed with radial neuropathy in the year 2002, which was the first indication that she was beginning to thaw. Reportedly, Hetfield sent a private note of support, which marked the first time that they had communicated directly with one another in almost 20 years. The statement was made by Hetfield in an interview in the year 2023. "We were kids, and we handled it. When I look back, I realized that there were more effective methods to deal with what was going on. The problem was that we lacked the maturity and the tools necessary to handle conflict in a healthy manner." Hetfield's admission that he had missed Mustaine's friendship and creative input more than he had ever revealed publicly was the most startling aspect of his remarks. Hetfield had never admitted to missing Mustaine in public before. This honesty made it possible to have a full reconciliation with the other party. Their reconciliation has become a compelling example of how even the most profound disagreements can finally be overcome with the passage of time, maturity, and honest conversation. Both musicians are currently in their 60s and are still actively performing. We appreciate you watching. You may view another video by clicking here, and you should also make sure to subscribe to our channel.